All right, host. I guess we should start. Okay. So let me just see if anybody else is asked to share. I don't think so. Okay. So, welcome. This is the automatic updates technical overview and how you can help. And so basically we're going to be going over in more detail than we did in the keynote, some of the technical aspects of the system that's being created and sort of highlight areas where you can help or you can help. Wrong, I need to switch to advanced slides. Okay. So I'm Ted Bowman. I'm the principal software engineer at Acquia and the Drupal acceleration team. I'm the co-maintainer of layout builder and settings tray in Drupal core, and I'm Ted Bow on Drupal.org and Twitter. Travis, try to introduce yourself. You're muted, Travis.
I turned on my video instead of my audio.
Not your audio. I noticed that. I didn't want to say anything.
Thank you.
But then it was very quiet. So
as anyone who is capable of reading has already gathered while I borked my entrance, I'm a senior software engineer at Acquia, adjacent to Ted, which is why he feels comfortable laughing at me right now. We're on the same team. And my username on D.O reflects my human name. I'm working on the staged update aspect of this, and we'll talk about that a little bit in.
All right, Jess.
And my name is Jess. I'm better known as XJM on Drupal.org. I am one of the 2 release managers for Drupal 8, 9, and 10 core, which means that I'm the person, one of the 2 people who creates the releases that you update on your sites each month. Also a member of the Drupal security team, and as a release manager, I have been involved in basically every security release Drupal 8 and higher have ever had. So when you get the disapproving emails reminding you to apply a security update to your site, you can think of that as like my technical embodiment, being sad that you haven't installed those releases yet. I also work at Acquia. I'm not XJM on Twitter. I'm XJM Drupal. For all of y'all Drupalists following XJM on Twitter, that's some guy named Zav who's made 4 tweets in the past decade. I know there's a bunch of Drupalist followers he has. Switch and follow XJM Drupal instead. That's me.
All right, learned something new today. All right, David.
Yep.
Hey, I'm David Strauss. I've done a number of various initiatives with Drupal, all the way from configuration management to database stuff to work on the security team. And I am excited to be participating in this project to embed great designs around security and safe package management for Drupal.
All right, so definitely some other people helped us out with the presentation, so I would like to thank them. All right, so what we're going to, hopefully everyone the opportunity to see our keynote this morning, which introduced the whys behind our initiative and the high-level goals for a secure staged composer integrated update system. This session will focus more on technical specification, various elements of the updater, and highlight the work outstanding in each area. So in particular, we'll start talking about package verification. You might have seen me talk in the update framework earlier today. This session will cover our PHP Tough client and our specific plans for the update server. Then we'll talk about composer verification integration. So basically integrating that PHP Tough library with Composer. And then Travis will go over a Symfony console application he's creating to make staged Composer updates that can be checked for validity and applied to the site without the normal time that Composer would take to run updates. And we'll go over the update readiness checks, which we're adding to Drupal core to ensure that sites are currently compatible with the automatic update system, so there's no surprises when that security release comes out. And then we'll talk about the Drupal core integration of sort of items 1 through 3 above and in this list, and that live outside of Drupal core and how they're accessed or called from inside Drupal core. And then finally, we'll go over user interface changes that will be necessary to present the entire system in an understandable way to site administrators. So let's get started with package verification. We said earlier we're sort of guesstimating that we're about 60% done with this portion. We're verifying packages for updates is not a problem that's unique to Drupal, so there's a lot of great previous work in this area. For this reason, we've decided that we should not invent a new system, but instead build upon an existing one. And we've chosen the update framework, also known as TUF, which is a widely used specification for creating secure update systems. We only need to make the client implementation in PHP because the TUF client only interacts with the TUF server by downloading a series of signed metadata and target files. The existing Python server implementation that we'll use creates JSON versions of these metadata files, and the client that we're creating is able to read these files because they follow the known TUF specification. So let's look at the very basics of how a developer might use this library directly. So this would be a case like outside of Composer if somebody just wanted to have a secure system to download the most recent versions of particular files. So we're going to look at this top section first. The first thing we need to do is create a file fetcher. The PHP TUF library has a file fetcher interface, and it ships with a guzzle file fetcher implementation. So we can simply create an instance here with our base URL of our remote TUF repo. Next, we need to create something to represent our client state. For testing, we're currently using a memory storage class. The code that uses the library just needs to create a storage class that implements array access interface to represent the client's repo state. Once you've created this class, we simply load the client version of the root JSON file and any other TUF metadata files we have locally. For production use, a file-based storage class would probably need to be created. The TUF library doesn't necessarily need to have an opinion on how the client state is stored, as long as it gets the expected interface. Every client application would need to ship a root.json file at some point with their application to start using the PHP TUF library. So at some point before Drupal automatic updates can be enabled, Drupal will need to ship its own version or its own root.json file that would allow sites to start using the automatic update system. So finally, we create our client repo updater. So we pass it the fetcher and the client repo. So basically something to fetch the remote files and then something that represents the client state. And then we refresh our client state and then download the file we want. So we can be sure in this case that we're getting the latest and correct version of this file. So although all the developer using PHP TUF library we need to know is the name of the file that they would like to download. Behind the scenes, we refresh our client status to match the current status of the TUF repo in the server. The client will make sure it has the latest version of all the metadata files and that the metadata files themselves are signed correctly with the roles and keys defined in the root.json file. We will also update the root.json file if necessary. When a client requests a file, it must search the target metadata files to find the correct metadata for the file it wants to download. The target role can delegate the signing of the target files to any number of other roles with their own signing keys. In this example, our target file metadata was found in the text file targets.json file. We can see that in this case, maybe they delegated the signing to text files and then to zip files. So we'll see how this might work later with our Composer example. So the metadata for the file will have at least one signature for the signed file and with the correct key and the expected length of the file. So the PHP TUF library is intended to sign secure arbitrary target files. There's no opinion on what these files are. Of course, to secure Drupal automatic updates, we need a solution that works well with Composer. This becomes a bit tricky because Composer itself is in charge of downloading the packages, and it is not easy to swap out this for something that's TUF aware. As a solution, To this problem, we are creating a new PHP Tough Composer integration plugin to ensure that all Composer downloads are secure. For PHP Tough to secure Composer updates, the secured target files needed to not only be the packages to be installed by Composer, like Drupal releases and vendor releases of vendor packages that we depend on, but also the metadata files for each Composer repository, which tells Composer what releases are available. If the package downloads themselves can be compromised, then malicious code could be installed on the site. If the metadata files were compromised, then Composer could be tricked into installing an older package that is signed correctly but has a known security vulnerability. Another complication is that to implement the Tough specification correctly, we need to not only access the files after they are downloaded, but also need to access them, the stream of the downloaded file, to ensure that it does not exceed the expected number of bytes specified in Tough's metadata for the file. We got some feedback from the Composer maintainers. Basically, we sort of approached them first about, could we integrate Tough directly into Composer? Right now, that's not going to work for them, but they gave us great feedback on how to make the Tough our integration plugin better, and also gave us feedback on what Composer itself could do to change to make sort of this ability to take over the downloads or to respond to downloads much simpler. So Gina Proxima, who will be on the Q&A later, has been working on some pull requests against Composer. He's got some already in, and also some in the progress that will really simplify the Composer integration plugin. So now Travis is going to talk about staged Composer updates.
Thank you, Ted. So the overview here, this aspect of the total infrastructure, goal-wise is to safely perform code and possibly database updates, might discuss that later, on a live site with the least possible impact, such as downtime. This replaces the A/B loader concept that we have discussed in the past. It's going to accomplish the goal by copying the whole code base somewhere else, performing the updates there, then merging the changes back into the live site. And then I take a nap, which is my version of profit. Next.
Yeah, getting back to my browser window. Okay. Or did I skip? Sorry, I thought I didn't skip a slide.
Nope, you got it. So we talk about copying the whole code base elsewhere, and this directory structure illustrates the default approach there. The left directory structure depicts just the site or application as it is live. Usually, this is what is already the case today. The addition of the .composer staging directory on the right side provides the somewhere else that I referred to before, where the composer commands to update the code base are actually performed, so that long-running commands or commands that may potentially fail and need to be rolled back can be done without negatively impacting the live application. In other words, while all of that staging is taking place, the live application or site is going to be untouched, unchanged, and it will continue serving the site until the changes are ready to be merged back in. There is one important technical problem to be solved here, and that is how we handle user or uploaded files that may be added to writable directories between the time that the composer staging begins and is ultimately merged back in. The approach that we are currently entertaining is to have some means of declaring paths that should be omitted from the copying process. We haven't decided definitely on a mechanism for declaring those exclusions yet. We've talked about having some extra data in composer JSONs, or having some kind of git ignore like file, like a .composer staging ignore that kind of propagates the impact down to child directories. That question is open for discussion at present. Next, in terms of the technical implementation, we are doing a Symfony console command. And this is the general shape of it right here. The commands are in the order that they would actually be performed. They are begin, stage, commit, and clean. And these commands could be actually executed on the shell, or they could be invoked via the code API of the command in the PHP process from Drupal core. Next. This is one possible implementation that illustrates the shape of things in general. We might imagine a script added to the core scripts in Drupal that gets invoked via cron, or could even be invoked via a like page load process within kind of like we had poor man's cron in the past. That would be a possibility. Such a script would begin by checking to see if there were available updates at all, and it would just do that in the active directory. If there were available updates, then it would begin the staging of the active directory by copying the whole thing out minus the excluded paths to either the default .composer staging directory within the application root, since we can't assume that any sites will have write access to any directory outside their application root. We can, in that case, specify a staging directory path on the command line. Once we've done that, then we stage any composer command we like on the staging directory. The stage command just passes through any composer command with any arguments. So I imagine that the default there would be to composer update. I could also imagine a composer require to get a specific version of something, but as I say, just pass through whatever is needed. Then it would handle failure if, for example, composer couldn't resolve a set of installable versions. Then, as most of us know, when composer hits that scenario, it just cancels and backs things back out, resets your composer JSON to the previous state. So we would just need to handle that contingency and decide what to do, whether to return an error code or just go on our merry way, what have you. Assuming that the composer commands succeeded, then we would put the site into maintenance mode for the only step that will actually affect the live code base, which is the commit command. And the commit command is what takes all of the changes that were done on the staging directory and merges or syncs them back into the live directory, once again taking into account the excluded paths. Then we may have other steps, such as updating the database, clearing the cache, that we may need to do before we take the site out of maintenance mode, and then we do actually take the site out of maintenance mode. And then optionally, we can remove the staging directory with the clean command. Drupal core itself will only implement the this staging operation that I've just described. There will be APIs provided for hosting providers that want to implement something more sophisticated, such as their own dev stage prod workflows. The atomic command-based design of the Symfony console command should make it pretty easy to find places to hook into. If you have a hosting platform or any other use case where you might need special integrations, please reach out to us sooner than later so that we can consider those needs in our design and try to provide you hooks or extensions to support that use case. Next.
Oops, sorry.
This slide just says, I'm doing my best and get off my back.
This slide says he has not been working on it for that long compared to the other stuff that we've been doing, basically.
That's good.
All right.
That's a more generous representation. Thank you, Ted. And that is everything for the staged updates. Thank you.
Thanks, Travis. So the previous libraries that we talked about can all be found at github.com/php-tough. This is our sort of GitHub organization for taking on all these things. So I'm going to talk very briefly about the update readiness checks. We're about, say, 50% done with this. So automatics aren't going to really help your site if they don't work on your particular site. And we want to make sure that your site is ready to apply updates. We have a core issue for this that's pretty close. After we commit the core issue, we'll need to port there's a lot of, there's an existing contrib module and it has a bunch of checkers. Some of them will apply, some of them won't apply because the contrib module is based on tarball updates, and the core solution will be composer based. So not everything will apply. So the readiness checks will have 3 points at which they'll run. So regularly on cron. So to make sure you don't want to be surprised when a security update comes and not know that your site for some reason is not compatible with the automatic update system. Right before the update, so basically before we attempt an update, we don't want to attempt it if we are pretty sure it's going to fail for some reason. And then after verification. So after we have that staging point, anything that we need to verify at that point, we can also run readiness checks there. So as Travis said, for the composer staging stuff, there'll be API points that hosting providers can hook into. And here again, we have an API for readiness checks that anybody can write new readiness checkers, swap out ones that are in core that don't make sense for your particular use case. And we have a basic interface for the readiness checker. Obviously, once this is committed, it'll be more for sure, but we just have this idea of get results where you get a series of list of readiness checker result objects. All right, so for core integration, the update module in Drupal is basically our source for bringing down the XML that tells us which updates are secure, which ones are security releases, which previous releases are unsecure. And so we'll be relying on that to, in the new automatic updates module, be relying on the stability of the update module. And there's always room for help in creating in the update module. It serves us well, but it's been there for a long time. So we're trying to modernize parts of it, and also always good to add more testing. Basically, in Drupal core will actually, sorry, I missed a stage here. I'm just realizing. Drupal core would actually call the staging thing that the staging Symfony console command that Travis was going over, and then that would invoke, because the Composer integration plugin would work with any way that you invoke Composer, and then that integration plugin would call the PHP Tough library, and then the Tough library would call the Drupal.org Tough server to get the metadata and the targets. All right, so Jess is going to talk a little bit about user interface changes that we'll need.
Yeah, so all of this is highly theoretical right now. We don't have designs, we don't have mock-ups. Basically, I just spent some time last night brainstorming the problems that we need to solve. Next.
We're on the help wanted slide. Can you see it?
Yeah, good. Yes, I can. Good.
Okay.
Pro tip, don't use ad blockers with Hopin. So the first thing I wanted to say about the UI, and this is pretty important, is that currently we do not have anyone on the initiative team with either design or user experience expertise. So if you're a designer, if you have UX skills, we need your help to complete the user interface for this. Core has enough important user interfaces already that were quote unquote designed by engineers, and so we don't need to add another one. Next. So the first thing here is we're going to show you a couple of the elements of the existing user interface for the update module, because as Ted said, the automatic updates will depend on the update module because we rely on the APIs and data that update module already knows how to interpret. So the screenshot left here is a tiny portion of the river of information that you get from the update status report. It shows you the current releases you have installed of not only core, but every single contributed module in your site. It will indicate in, I think, like alphabetical order, which of those modules have updates available that are not security updates, and then which have security updates that are required. There's definitely some opportunities to improve the usability of this. We could take the work that's already been done on the status report to simplify and provide a higher level overview of the status and apply that here, for example. I don't even know that there is an open issue for that, but there's a lot of opportunity to make this a better user interface. Next, please. So another thing that core includes is that for tarball built sites, contributed modules can be updated with this form with check marks. It's a separate form on a separate tab. Now, this form is already incompatible with all of your Composer-based installations because this does not perform a Composer dependency update of the contributed module. It just downloads a tarball and sticks it in the files, in the module tree. We're going to need to basically replace this form with what we're going to be using for auto updates that will integrate updates for both core and contrib. Next, please. Finally, the third piece here, the update module also includes a little slightly confusing form to, quote, install a new module. The form is linked from the action button on the extend page, a little blue, like, install new module button. It's confusing because we actually use the word install to mean two different things in the update module and in core. So on the extend page on the contrib module listing, or contrib and core module listing, install means enable the module that's already in the code base. But on this form, it means, find a new tarball on the internet and then upload it to the site's code base without actually enabling it. Now, this might sound like a silly thing if you're a developer and you've never thought about people who, don't spend their lives on the command line, but this is actually a much loved feature on shared hosting. So we can't just remove this because it's tarball based. We need to deprecate this and then provide a replacement for it that is compatible with the Composer auto updater. Which brings me to the next slide. We mentioned this morning, but this is relevant to the project browser initiative. In the Dries note, Dries proposed a new strategic initiative to allow people to browse the contributed projects that are available on Drupal.org and install them into the site from within the Drupal application. A lot of people are excited about this, want to know how they could help. So this will ultimately be what replaces that simple little tarball form that we were just talking about, providing not only the ability to install the module in the site, those Git buttons that are there, but also to discover in the same interface rather than having to go and search through 15,000 forms on Drupal.org. And it'll do obviously much more than the current form does, but there is an opportunity here to work on dependencies. Almost everything we're doing in automatic updates is going to block the final implementation of this initiative. Even so, you can help with it right now, even as it's just in early planning stages, by working on auto updates. Next, please. So in addition to some of the things I highlighted already that are changes we'll need to make, there's lots of usability issues that are already outstanding. I put a few of the node IDs in the slide. One example is, so right now, to make it clearer on the update status report what the expected actions are when there's a security update available. Emily Nouveau, who used to work at the DA and then worked with us at Acquia and now has moved on to even better things, designed an interface a couple of years ago, actually, where there's a clear action item that distinguishes between the security update and the release. So you can check out the issues on the slide. This is one way to sort of help tangentially with the initiative. We're not going to necessarily be working on these other usability improvements directly, but some of them will end up blocking. Next, please. Oh, and you can find more, by the way, by searching in the update.module component of the core issue queue, and then just search for the usability tag. So in addition to all of those things, there's also like new things we're going to need to do with the user interface. Specifically for the auto updates module. So if auto updates is enabled and the update module is on, we'll need to swap out those action buttons I was just talking about. And instead of just like what they do currently is download a tarball, well, that's not what you'll want to do if you have, if you allow updates through the user interface on your site. You'll want the button to actually trigger the attended update for that project. So that's the minimum change that we'll want to make. And, you know, as I mentioned, we also might want to try to reduce the noise and make it clear that, you know, make security updates float to the top and kind of not bother telling you with the versions of all the other modules at the same time. Next, please. We need to review and improve the user interface for the readiness checks. This also hasn't had a UI review. Next bullet. We need to design some user error interactions. So like all of those 4 or 5 components that Ted showed you, from the core update module down through the stager, the tough integration, tough itself, all of those things are going to have error conditions where we'll need to respond to a failure of some type. And so we need a way to communicate that to the user that's effective. And then finally, next, we need to design a somewhat complicated configuration UI. This is something that came up in the Q&A this morning a bit. This will control things like whether the site should update itself automatically or not. Which updates are automatic? Like, should you only apply highly critical security releases and assume that the rest of the updates shouldn't happen in production? Should it update all security releases? Or, you know, early in the week, I was pointing out that a lot of times when people just skip from security release to security release, they've missed 6 patch releases and sometimes a minor release in between there. So that means that they're actually updating a ton of stuff all at once. So for some sites, it's actually probably better to have all patch level updates apply automatically. That way, you don't have to go back between the patch window and the security window in those 2 weeks and do a manual update. You can just assume the site's up to date. This will be the case for probably most users in the long tail on shared hosting and so forth. We also need to have configuration for whether or not database updates run. That's also a very site-specific choice. Should you update core only? Do you try to update contrib? Like, core has pretty strict rules about what changes can be made in what releases. There are regressions sometimes, but we generally have a good idea about what changes are allowable, but contrib has a much wider range of allowed changes in different releases. So you might want to enable only core updates. Those are just some of the examples of all the different choices a site owner might need to make. Some of that will be exposed in the default UI. Some might be available as configuration options that you set on the command line, but that by default, a site owner who's only using the interface wouldn't use. So those are some of the problems we need to solve. And I think that brings me, this is basically at the end of our time now. We kind of just have quickly a recap of the information about the contribution opportunities that are coming up in 5 minutes. So back to Ted. Ted, you're muted. But I can see the captions, so that's cool.
Pointing that out. Yeah, so this is a team of people who've been working for a while. So we have contributions coming up in 5 minutes. Register at DrupalContributions.opensocial.site. I think the link should be in the hop-in somewhere. And then to enroll in the event, once you're there, go to node/53. If you're on Drupal Slack, then you can go to panel.o updates channel. If you're not, go to drupal.org/Slack and it'll tell you how to join. That'll be great for today, but also ongoing. And also, we'd like to invite you to participate in the next initiative meeting in Drupal Slack, which is Tuesday, April 20th. It begins at 1300 Eastern Daylight Savings Time and 1700 UTC time. So I'm not sure if we have time for questions. I'm very sorry. But
went slightly over, but this is also the end of the day, so if
so
we're allowed,
I'm going to look at the questions.
You can continue if you'd like for a bit more.
Okay. So I don't see anything in the questions tab. Maybe people ask questions in chat.
I tried to answer one of the questions in chat.
Okay.
I responded to the wrong Peter. I thought Peter W was going to get me through, and apparently not. Peter asked about how any of this affects the actual update status XML delivery, and I basically said that we will need to either modernize it or replace it. And just to get into a little bit more detail, the reason why is that we're designing the infrastructure for these updates to not require a properly configured and modern TLS stack on the client side. And by client, I mean the actual Drupal site itself, because that's where the Composer build is running. And that's because OpenSSL versions can vary quite widely. What's built into PHP versus the OS can vary a lot. CAs can vary a lot. So we're carrying the chain of trust with us, but it's not very useful for us to do that if we don't also fix how update availability checking works to use a similar anchor of trust.
So David, minimally what we'd want to do, right, is add the XML files themselves as targets in the tough repo.
Yes, that would be one way to solve it.
Okay.
The other.
Sorry, I was just going to say Neil hopped on, so can probably speak to the infrastructural changes, because I think that you're planning, right, to change it to JSON anyway in a separate issue, not related to automatic updates.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, that XML is a bit old. We revised it a bit for Drupal 9 and semantic versioning. That actually, if it could be redone to rely only on Composer metadata, that would be ideal.
That's part of what I mean by also like replace it, in the sense that I'm not sure that modernizing it is the right choice when, if we're installing everything through Composer, then the ability to know of an update that isn't yet available in Composer, or to find out about an update in Composer, like vice versa, like any desync between these things doesn't actually help. So Composer has discovery for this. It just doesn't have security metadata.
Exactly. Right. That's the point that I was going to raise, and that's actually a really big deal for us. There's information about which logic about which minor releases are supported that core does based on that feed, and then like which releases specifically are insecure, which are considered a security update that core specifically has logic for that we implemented. So until a few years ago, Composer won't fix an issue related to this. We can try to bring it up again.
I think we still put the data in there. Like there's an extra key that we can shove anything in, but you need a Composer plugin to actually do something with that data. I don't think that actually caught on.
It looks like that's probably the only question we have time for, because it is now the beginning of the contribution time half of the day. So I think we probably want to wrap up there. And I encourage everyone to join us on Open Social. If you have more questions, you can go to drupalcontributions.opensocial.site/node/53. You'll need to enroll and then join the event, and then we can talk more there.
So Angie posted, if you look in the chat about 4 minutes ago, Angie posted that link. So yeah, great to see you all over there. Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you.